Something very bad is about to happen to Iran, and if the country has any sense, it, along with its Houthi proxies in Yemen, should be shaking in its collective boots. Why? As we speak, the US is gathering a massive military force in the Middle East that has a single target: Iran. 2 aircraft carriers, American bombers, and much more are on their way, and if Iran isn't careful, that buildup could spell the end of the entire country. So, what's happening? We'll start with the aircraft carriers. Right now, the USS Harry S. Truman is marauding throughout the Red Sea while serving as the launching pad for an array of US airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. The militant group, which has long been considered an Iranian proxy, is under such heavy fire that it's likely collapsing before our eyes. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, because the USS Harry S. Truman is a terrifying foe. The ship is the 8th of America's 10 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, making it one of the most important examples of how the US launches combined attacks against its enemies. It cost $4.5 billion to build and was officially commissioned in July 1998 and has seen action in multiple US conflicts since, most notably during the global war on terror that began following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The aircraft carrier is massive. It measures 1,092 feet long with a 252-foot beam and is capable of displacing an enormous 116,400 tons of water. For context, the entire Iranian Navy can displace only around 2,223 tons, meaning the USS Harry S. Truman displaces almost half of Iran's entire combined navy. That indicates how huge this ship is and how useless many of Iran's much smaller frigates and corvettes would be in a straight-up fight against the aircraft carrier and the several destroyers that accompany it everywhere it goes. The USS Harry S. Truman also has a powerful 260,000 horsepower engine that allows it to reach speeds of around 30 knots, making it surprisingly mobile for a ship of its size. It's also home to around 5,600 US military personnel, with around 2,480 of those personnel being dedicated to its air wing. And therein lies the true threat this ship poses to both the Houthis and Iran. The carrier is capable of carrying up to 90 aircraft of different types, including the EA-18G Growler and the FA-18EF Super Hornet. The ship can also be home to anti-ship and anti-submarine helicopters, along with other fighters and bombers and search and rescue aircraft. Add to all of this its missile loadout, which includes a pair of medium-range Sea Sparrow launchers and 2 rolling airframe missile launchers to counter aerial threats, and you get a devastatingly powerful vessel. Iran, and more specifically the Houthis, have been feeling the power of that ship since March 15th. That's when US President Donald Trump ordered the first of what have since become daily airstrikes against key Houthi positions in Yemen. Satellite photos published by Newsweek on March 20th show the USS Harry S. Truman stationed about 480 miles off the coast of Yemen, as it's being used as the launching pad for those daily airstrikes. As of March 27th, those strikes have killed at least 61 people, according to the Houthis, with the death toll likely to have risen since then. Tellingly, the Houthis have offered no confirmation that the US strikes have killed any of the group's leaders, preferring instead to focus on the devastation US bombing is causing to Yemen's residential districts. The US says differently. It claims that its strikes killed one of the Houthis' top missile experts on March 31st, and has implied that other members of Houthi leadership have been killed in strikes both before and after. These airstrikes represent a change in the US approach to the group, with US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz telling ABC on March 16th, "The difference is these were not kind of pinprick, back and forth, what ultimately proved to be feckless attacks," Waltz claimed, when hailing the Trump-led US strikes while throwing shade on the US's previous campaign against the Houthis under former President Joe Biden. This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. That's bad enough news for Iran. The country relies on the Houthis to enable it to project power in both Yemen and the Red Sea, as we'll soon explain. But the last few days have revealed that things are going from bad to worse when it comes to the Houthis. How? If one US aircraft carrier in the Red Sea causes so much damage, imagine what 2 will do. You won't have to imagine for very long, because the US is sending another carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, to support the USS Harry S. Truman. On April 2nd, Newsweek reported that satellite images show the USS Carl Vinson in Philippine waters as it transits to the Middle East. That's big news, because the carrier was previously stationed in the Pacific, where it served as a deterrent to China, and it means that the US is essentially doubling its naval and aerial capacity in the Red Sea. After all, the USS Carl Vinson is a Nimitz-class carrier, just like the USS Harry S. Truman. That means it has the same specifications, which extends to the number of aircraft stationed on the ship. The Houthis now face assaults from up to 180 American aircraft rather than 90, meaning Trump's Yemen airstrikes are set to become even more intense than they already are. We also know that the USS Carl Vinson has at least one F-35C fighter jet on board, which gives the US more stealth attack options in the Middle East. The carrier is also accompanied by two other warships, the USS Sterett and the USS Princeton, which only adds to the growing US naval power Iran faces. And there's more. The US is also sending its oldest aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, to fill the Pacific gap left behind by the USS Carl Vinson. While that older carrier won't be focused on the Middle East right now, the fact that it's heading to the Pacific means it could be moved in the future if the situation with Iran escalates. Why do all of these aircraft carriers making moves in the Middle East spell bad news for Iran? We touched on one of the reasons already. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea are coming to an end. That's bad news for Iran because the Houthis have long acted as Iranian proxies in the Middle East. As the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, notes, Iran has supported the militant group since 2011, when the Houthis revolted against Yemen's internationally recognized government. By 2014, the Houthis had successfully overthrown that government, installing themselves in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a in the process. War still rages in Yemen. However, Iran's support has enabled the group to become a key power player in the Yemen crisis. It's believed that Iran's support of the Houthis began in 2009, and the CFR says it's almost certain the militant group was receiving weapons, including drones and missiles, from Iran by the time it overthrew Yemen's government. That type of assistance continues today. For instance, in 2024, the US intercepted a shipment bound for Yemen from Iran that carried military aid, including missile warheads, anti-tank missiles, and drone parts. These close ties have allowed Iran to use the Houthis for geopolitical purposes. We see this most clearly in the Red Sea, where the Houthis first hijacked a commercial ship in November 2023. Since then, the group has launched dozens of missile and drone attacks on ships sailing through the Red Sea, sinking at least 2 vessels, seizing 3, and killing at least 4 crew members. Why did Iran support the Houthis in these attacks? The Houthis themselves provided the answer, claiming they launched their Red Sea attacks in support of Hamas in Gaza, another of Iran's proxies. Therein lies the reason why things are getting bad for Iran right now. Hamas is still embroiled in its war with Israel, as is Hezbollah, which is yet another Iranian proxy. Now the US is hell-bent on wiping out the Houthis in Yemen. All of this adds up to Iran losing the proxies it's relied upon for so long to upset the Middle East power balance. With those groups quickly disappearing, Iran's influence in the Middle East is disappearing along with them. The country can no longer use these groups to indirectly attack its enemies, placing Iran in an awkward position where it either has to stop trying to project power or launch attacks itself. The latter isn't an option. Direct Iranian attacks on Israel or the US in the Middle East would provide justification for the country to be targeted. Iran doesn't want that. It wouldn't be able to withstand a US assault. And if you think that the US strikes against the Houthis might not have that much influence, then think again. On April 3rd, The Telegraph reported that a senior Iranian official claimed that Iran is already withdrawing its support from the Houthis. Every meeting Iran is holding right now is dominated by discussions about Trump, and none of the regional groups we previously supported are being discussed, claimed the official. Worse yet for the Houthis, along with Iran's ability to project power in the Middle East, the official says, "The view here is that the Houthis will not be able to survive and are living their final months or even days, so there's no point in keeping them on our list. They were part of a chain that relied on Nasrallah, who is the former Secretary General of the Houthis, and Assad, and keeping only one part of that chain for the future makes no sense." In other words, Iran has been forced to cut and run. That leaves the Houthis alone to deal with 2 aircraft carriers the US has sent into the Red Sea. Once the Houthis inevitably fall, those carriers could then turn their attention to Iran. How could things get any worse for Iran? Well, the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS Carl Vinson aren't the only threats Iran faces right now. As those aircraft carriers keep up the pressure on the Houthis, the US is also making moves involving a remote island base named Diego Garcia. That base is located in the Indian Ocean and is owned by the United Kingdom, which leases it to the United States. According to ABC News, the US has spent the last week or so sending several of its B-2 Spirit nuclear-capable bombers to the island. Reports vary on how many of the bombers the US has sent, with some claiming that there are now 6 on the island, while others suggest that the US has dedicated half of its 19-strong fleet to Diego Garcia. ABC says that the move accomplishes 3 tasks: increasing the United States military presence in the region, enabling continued strikes of targets in Yemen, and sending a message to Iran. All 3 tasks will worry Iran, though it's the latter that will be its biggest concern. The US transferring B-2s to Diego Garcia comes in the wake of Trump penning a letter to Iran, telling the country that its leaders need to come to the table to discuss a new nuclear program deal. Iran refused that offer, claiming that it doesn't trust the US to stick to any deal. Trump's response to that refusal was a succinct threat. If Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. The US can't get more direct in its threats than that. And with the B-2 bombers being moved to Diego Garcia, Iran has two reasons to worry that Trump is serious. Why? The threat that these bombers represent, and the fact that there's nothing Iran can really do to counter that threat. On the bomber front, the B-2 is one of the most devastating aerial threats the US has in its arsenal. A multi-role bomber, the B-2 represents a massive leap forward in technology, according to the US Air Force. It's a stealth bomber, which makes it difficult for enemy radars to track while it's in flight. And its 6,000 nautical mile range means that it can fly from Diego Garcia, pepper Iran with bombs, and then make it back to the base in a single trip. Not that it will need to, because the US has also sent aerial tankers, which are aircraft the B-2 can use to refuel itself mid-flight, to the base as well. The bomber is capable of reaching high subsonic speeds just shy of Mach 1, and it has a flight ceiling of around 50,000 feet. It's also proven, as it was the US's main bomber during Operation Iraqi Freedom, where it flew 22 sorties and dropped over 1.5 million pounds of munitions. Speaking of munitions, the B-2 can be loaded with the US Joint Direct Attack munition, which is essentially a precision glide bomb, along with a host of other bombs, including Mark 82 and Mark 84 munitions. Oh, and it can also drop B-61 and B-83 nuclear bombs, just in case the US decides it wants to completely wipe Iran off the map. If that wasn't bad enough for Iran, we also have to consider the Diego Garcia base itself. Though some military commanders inside Iran are pushing for the country to launch a preemptive strike against the base, the reality is that most of the country's weapons aren't capable of reaching it. As the War Zone reports, Diego Garcia's location in the Indian Ocean places it some 2,358 miles from Iran's southern border. Not even Iran's longest-range ballistic missiles can reach that far. The maximum range of these missiles is 1,242 miles. So Iran would either have to launch missiles from the sea, which isn't an option when the US has aircraft carriers patrolling the Red Sea, or from another country's territory to hit Diego Garcia. In short, Iran can't counter the US's B-2 bomber threat. Add the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS Carl Vinson to that equation, and you get a country that's watching its regional influence slip away as the US surrounds it with firepower. When we say something bad is about to happen to Iran, we mean it. The country's refusal to pen a new nuclear deal with the United States has triggered a massive military buildup in the Middle East that places the entire country under a massive threat, and the timing could not be worse for Iran. Even as it watches the Houthis in Yemen get decimated by US airstrikes, it also can't do anything about the situation Hamas faces in Gaza. In late March, Israel began a full ground operation in Gaza, through which it intends to eliminate the remnants of Hamas. Israel has already done a number on this previously powerful Iranian proxy. By October 2024, a year after the terrorist attacks on Israel that sparked the war in Gaza, Israel was already claiming that it had killed 17,000 of the 25,000 to 30,000 militants in Hamas. That cuts the group down to about a third of its previous strength, which manifests as a massive weakening of Iranian influence in the Middle East. Now, Israel is targeting the tunnels under Gaza that Hamas uses to smuggle weapons and evade Israeli airstrikes. Thus far, Israel has destroyed between 40% and 60% of those tunnels. A renewed focus on them could make the massive underground network unusable, forcing the remaining members of Hamas to the surface, where they can become victims of Israel's renewed airstrikes and ground operations. Trump supports Israel's renewal of attacks on Hamas, at least according to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. She said in late March that the president made it very clear to Hamas that if they did not release all of the hostages, there would be hell to pay, Leavitt claimed while referencing a delayed and ultimately failed hostage transfer between Israel and Hamas. The situation, let's not forget, is completely the fault of Hamas when they launched that brutal attack on Israel on October 7th, Leavitt added, before she stated that Trump fully supports Israel's actions in Gaza. That means things are getting even worse for Iran. Not only is it facing down massive pressure from the US military buildup in the Red Sea and on Diego Garcia, but it now has to deal with a US administration that fully supports the wiping out of one of its proxies. And if Iran tries to help Hamas, as it did in 2024 with several missile attacks, it will only bring the wrath of the US down upon itself even faster. So where does all of this leave Iran? It's now practically surrounded by overwhelming US firepower against which it can't really defend. Iran can't hit Diego Garcia with any sort of consistency, and the two US aircraft carriers in the Red Sea are much more than a match for its naval assets, as well as being capable of shooting Iranian drones and missiles out of the sky. The best Iran can hope for is that its air defenses, which include the Russian S-300 that has already shown itself to be less than capable in the Ukraine war, will be able to stop the US bombs and missiles. Those anti-air systems may see some success, but it won't be enough to stop a concerted bombing campaign. The US campaign against the Houthis also means that Iran can't use that group to cause commercial shipping issues or control Yemen anymore. Plus, Hamas being under fire, along with Hezbollah, means that those groups aren't going to last much longer either. Iran's proxy game has ultimately come back to bite it, Where it once relied on groups that it funded and trained to carry out its dirty work for it, Iran is now being forced into a position where it has to capitulate to Trump's demands or defend itself with a military that isn't capable of standing up to the fraction of the US forces in the Middle East right now, never mind the country's full military. Middle East influence is slipping out of Iran's grasp. And no matter whether it chooses to fight or negotiate, the next few months, and potentially even years, are about to get very bad for the country. But what do you think about Iran's situation right now? Is there any way for the country to regain the influence it lost due to the issues with its proxies in Syria? Will Trump follow through on his threats to bomb Iran, or do you see Iran coming to the table to negotiate a new nuclear deal? Can Iran defend itself against the threats that are circling its borders? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for the latest commentary on events in the Middle East.